So you got information about Stephanie when you got your agenda. It's at the bottom of the agenda, but I just want to say a few more things about her. First of all, we're so happy that she's a Covenant member because she has lots of skills and lots of information. And in the this winter, we've been having book discussions on Wednesday nights, and she has led us through one book that was about the rise of white nationalism, which was quite an interesting book. And now this past week, she started leading us in a discussion of Evicted. And this is a book that's by Matthew Desmond. And Stephanie said when she read it, she knew that she wanted to do her dissertation on eviction. So currently, Stephanie, she finished her doctorate within the past year, and she's at the John Glenn Center at Ohio State. And before that, she worked for the Ohio Housing Finance Agency. She really knows, those of us who were at the session on Wednesday night, those of us from Covenant, know that she is very familiar with eviction, which is the topic she's going to talk with us about today. And I will write up something about the Desmond book on eviction for the next newsletter. So Stephanie, you are on.
Okay, thank you, Susan, for that very kind introduction. Oh, this is Lulu, and she's going to be apparently helping me present today because she's insisted on being in my lap this whole time. So we'll see what she does. But yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm excited to talk to you all about this important topic. And just to tell you a little bit about my research, I mainly focus on evictions, as Susan said, and more broadly, I conduct research on housing instability and criminal justice policy. Before I got interested in evictions, when I was at the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, I was the director of the state of Ohio's foreclosure prevention fund, which was called the Hardest Hit Fund. So my entire career in public policy, which is getting up to about 15 years now, has been focused on housing instability of some form, whether that's housing instability caused by foreclosures, or eviction, or actual homelessness. But today we're going to talk about eviction. And I am going to start by telling you the story of a teenage girl from Houston, Texas, whose name is Alondra Carmona. Alondra is a senior in high school, and she is set to graduate in just a few months. Alondra has big dreams. She wants to become a pediatric neurosurgeon. And I'm going to pause right there, and I'm going to let my dog out so she doesn't bark the whole time I'm talking. So excuse me, just a second. Okay, Lulu was more interested in what you all had to say than what I have to say, apparently. Okay, so Alondra has big dreams. She wants to become a pediatric neurosurgeon, and she has spent her high school career seeking out opportunities to help her achieve her dreams. At one point, she even managed to land a prestigious 6-week internship at Rice University. And in December, her hard work paid off when she found out that she had been accepted to the Ivy League women's institution, Barnard College. Not only that, but the college also awarded her a partial scholarship to help her cover some of her tuition and expenses. Now, this is a big deal for Alondra because Alondra comes from a low-income, single-parent household, and her mom works long hours to make enough money to support her family. It was tough, but they were making it. But then in March of last year, just as the pandemic was taking hold, Alondra's mom broke her ankle and couldn't work. So on top of attending high school, making top grades, filling out college applications, and seeking extra opportunities, Alondra began working at a fast food restaurant to save money for her college fund. Over many months, Alondra managed to save up about $2,000, which she thought would be enough to cover the portion of room and board that her partial scholarship wouldn't cover. Meanwhile, her mom had managed to go back to work, but the pandemic made their existing financial struggles even more challenging. Nevertheless, Alondra was excited about her upcoming graduation and optimistic about becoming the first person in her family to attend college. But earlier this month, on February 4th, mother gathered the family together to deliver heartbreaking news. Alondra's mother had been laid off in November. She hid the news from her family thinking she'd find a new job, but 3 months later, she was still unemployed and owed nearly $2,000 in rent. Even though the federal moratorium protects tenants from eviction, Alondra's landlord locked the family out of their apartment and told them they would not be allowed back in until they paid the rent. Alondra and her mother had no idea that this action was illegal. So Alondra made the heart-wrenching choice. She gave her mother all of her college savings to cover the rent, knowing that it might mean giving up her dream of attending Barnard College. Now, Alondra's story has a happy ending. She started a GoFundMe page, which led to a story that ran on a local news station, which led to an invitation to appear on Good Morning America. So many people have donated that she no longer has to choose between rent and college. However, across the United States, each year, millions of Americans face the difficult choice between rent and other expenses like food, the water bill, or a car repair, even funeral expenses. In 2016, the most recent year for which the Eviction Lab has compiled data, there were at least 2.35 million eviction filings and nearly 900,000 completed evictions. Not only that, but research suggests that for every formal eviction filing that goes through the legally prescribed process, there are two additional informal evictions that take place without any judicial involvement. And that doesn't even take into consideration the threat of eviction, which is what Alondra and her family experienced. Recent research based upon interviews with over 100 landlords in 3 major cities, and one of those is Cleveland, suggests that landlords frequently use the threat of eviction to collect debt from tenants, creating a host of negative consequences for the families who have to live with the stress of a constant threat of eviction. While about 1 in 19 households face eviction each year in the United States, the numbers are even worse for the state of Ohio. And worse still right here in Franklin County, where about 1 in every 13 tenant households received an eviction filing in 2016. In the 21 years from 1999 to 2019, the average number of evictions filed per year was 17,726, and that's just in Franklin County. The highest point was in the year 2008, which was right in the middle of the housing crisis. Yet, as you may recall, all the housing-related policy efforts during that time, which included a $32.7 billion investment at the federal level, were aimed at reducing the number of foreclosures. Given that huge investment and all the media attentions directed at foreclosure prevention, you might be surprised to learn that in Ohio, a state that was considered a hardest hit state for foreclosures, the number of foreclosures actually never got especially close to the number of evictions, while the rate of evictions among tenant households was nearly 3 times the rate of foreclosures among owner-occupied households. Despite that stark difference, there were no federal investments in eviction prevention during that time. The eviction problem was like a silent undercurrent in society. Going back to our previous chart, notice that dip in 2017? I call this the Desmond Effect, and that is because in 2016, a researcher named Matt Desmond published a book called Evicted: Poverty and Profit in the American City. In this book, Desmond followed the plights of 8 families struggling with housing instability and eviction. The book, which quickly became a New York Times bestseller, caught the attention of policymakers, advocates, journalists, and scholars. Suddenly, everyone was talking about the eviction problem. From Evicted and the burst of research that has followed, we have learned that evictions exact devastating consequences on households. Evictions are associated with a number of negative outcomes, including homelessness, job loss, infant mortality, and poor physical and mental health. We have also learned that low-income Black women with children are the demographic most likely to find themselves in eviction court. Particularly disturbing new research links Ohio's local news ordinances to an increased risk of eviction among victims of domestic violence. Likewise, such ordinances may cause some women to avoid reporting abuse for fear of losing their home. You probably have noticed that nearly all the statistics and studies I have presented so far rely on data gathered before 2020, before COVID-19 turned everything upside down. And many of you have probably heard about the fears from housing advocates and government officials that an eviction crisis is looming. These fears are based on record unemployment rates, which represent job losses that disproportionately impacted low-income minority households, the same households that, like Alondra's, were already at the greatest risk of eviction before the pandemic. The unemployment rate, which shot up to 14.7% in April of 2020, is still nearly twice what it was before the pandemic and is higher for Black, Hispanic, and Asian workers than it is for white workers. In addition, government economists believe that some of these job losses are permanent. Meanwhile, as federal, state, and local protections for tenants expire, some researchers estimate that 30 to 40 million households will be at risk of eviction, equating to about 29% to 43% of all tenant households in the United States. And that risk would just be spread over a few months after the federal moratoriums expire. So far, policy tools like the federal moratoria on eviction have postponed, but not stopped altogether, eviction filings. The current moratorium is set to expire on March 31st of 2021. As you can see from this chart, which compares eviction filings in Franklin County in 2019 and then 2020, that's the orange line on the bottom, eviction filings have continued throughout the pandemic, while courts were closed for most eviction cases in the early months of the pandemic. Most of these filings have since been disposed. That means they've been decided. There is a bit of good news here, which is that of the cases heard and decided between March 1st and October 31st of 2020, just 27% seem to have resulted in judgments, at least according to the rough public records data, which I have learned may undercount eviction judgments before it has properly been cleaned. But for comparison purposes, prior to the pandemic, about 2/3 of all eviction filings resulted in an eviction judgment, which is that order that says that you have to leave the property. There is a good news in all of this, which is that thanks to Matt Desmond's work to elevate the problem of evictions to the national stage, federal, state, and local policies to respond to the COVID recession did not ignore tenants as it did the policies of the Great Recession. Not only have we seen 2 eviction moratoria, but CARES Act funding for state and local governments spurred the creation of eviction prevention assistance programs to provide emergency rental assistance to renters, such as Ohio's new Home Relief Grant program. State and local governments have also supported expanded legal assistance for tenants, developed systems to better coordinate resources and services to households at risk of eviction, introduced eviction diversion programs, and implemented tenant education programs. Franklin County was an early mover in allowing tenants to seal prior eviction records. And in addition, Franklin County began removing eviction records that were more than 3 years old from its public website to prevent tenants from being blacklisted by landlords based upon old evictions. The policy innovations to prevent evictions and mitigate the harm caused by evictions are promising. However, it is important to understand that many of these innovations are treating the symptoms of the eviction crisis and not the roots. The roots of the eviction crisis are deep and pose significant policy challenges. Poverty, the resulting toxic stress and trauma caused by poverty, widening income inequality, lack of affordable housing, and the increasing segmentation of the housing market, where rising housing costs that have long outpaced income growth make it more and more difficult for low and moderate income families to purchase homes, are just a few of the root causes that have contributed to the problem of evictions. Addressing these problems requires systemic policy change, such as raising the federal minimum wage and/or implementing universal basic income, building more affordable housing, including permanent supportive housing, fully funding the Housing Choice Voucher Program to serve all income eligible households, and enacting a universal health care program that reduces employment from health insurance and lowers costs. Other policy recommendations address branches rather than roots, but can still make a difference for tenants right now and may be easier to enact quickly on the state or local levels. For instance, slowing down the extraordinarily fast eviction process, which in the state of Ohio is so fast that you can miss your payment on the 1st of the month and be evicted by the 23rd or 24th of the month. Other policy recommendations include guaranteeing a defense attorney for tenants, that's called right to counsel, establishing a permanent emergency assistance fund for tenants, increasing the generosity of unemployment benefits, reforming nuisance ordinances that increase the risk of eviction for domestic violence victims, providing support to evicted tenants to ensure a stable transition, including case management, assistance finding new housing, help transitioning to a new school for the children who are in households that are evicted, supporting changing addresses, including voter registration, enforcing code, and enacting a clean hands requirement that prevents landlords with code violations from evicting tenants, and banning source of income discrimination, which allows landlords to refuse to accept rent from a third-party source like a housing choice voucher. The big question here is, as members of a faith community, what can we do? This has been a tough question for me to answer, as I tend to think primarily about the big systemic change that we will truly need to end the eviction crisis. But there is still plenty that we can do. First, we can educate ourselves and others about the nature of eviction in our communities. That's what you're doing right now, so give yourself a pat on the back. Second, we can advocate either as individuals or as part of a group for the policy changes, big and small, that are needed at all levels of government. Third, you can offer your financial support to organizations that work to prevent evictions, such as the Community Mediation Services of Central Ohio and the Legal Aid Society of Columbus, and to organizations that create affordable housing and support families that have lost their housing, such as Homeport, Habitat for Humanity, and the Shelter Board. Finally, members of the faith community can act. Churches can play a positive role by, for instance, taking a rent relief offering or establishing an eviction prevention fund to support tenants in need. There are several churches in Central Ohio that already offer such funds, but those funds are small and get taken very, very quickly at the beginning of each fiscal year. Churches may want to consider aiming to go deep rather than wide by providing longer-term financial support paired with additional supportive services for a smaller number of households in need. Churches can also use their properties to provide supportive services such as legal assistance or EITC clinics. And as a sidebar, the EITC program is an important stabilizing program for millions of tenant households. As a similar example, in December, 2 churches in Orange County, California hosted events to help tenants sign up for a new local eviction diversion program that was being implemented in their county. Finally, as eviction often results in material loss for tenants who may lack the time and resources to transport all their belongings from one apartment to another, churches can consider developing programs that provide donated items such as furniture, kitchenware, or bedding to transitioning households such as recently evicted families, those exiting homelessness, or those escaping domestic violence. So these are the ideas that I've gleaned from conversations with others and reading about actions that other churches have taken. However, I would love to hear your thoughts and ideas about other ways congregations may be able to help. Perhaps together we can help create more happy endings like the one Alondra experienced. I look forward to responding to your questions. Thank you for your time and attention to this important issue.
So we have a few minutes if anybody has questions for Stephanie. And yes, Lynn.
Have you heard of Compass, which is housed at Broad Street Presbyterian Church?
Yes, I have, and I was looking at Compass last night, and that's an example of, right now the Compass program doesn't have assistance funds available, and I don't know the backstory there, but I'm guessing it's because it's those funds are small and get used up very quickly.
I believe we do have assistance funds, not for utilities right now, but we are definitely helping with rent.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Right now on the document that is available through the Franklin County Municipal Courts, it has Compass crossed out. And it has all the list of resources for the county, and then for the funds that have already been drained for the year, it has lines through them, and Compass has lines through it right now. So maybe that's something that needs to be corrected.
I'm doing volunteer work for them, and to my knowledge, we still have funds we are providing.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful.
Boy, I sure pray we haven't drained them all already. I will check with Robin Green. Shall I let you know?
Yes, yeah, sure. And I know several people over at the courthouse that are responsible for those documents. So we should make sure if they're available that people know about it. I will say that has been my experience. I've interviewed a lot of tenants down at the courthouse, and they would tell me about how they would go through that list, and the church programs, when they are available, are amazing. But oftentimes they find out that those funds get drained very quickly just because there's so many people. I mean, there's, in some years you have 18,000 eviction filings, and, and there's just only so many people that the funds are able to help.
They are also apparently helping to disseminate some other dollars, and I'm not aware. They're working with another program and helping move those processes along so that more people can be helped through that. Perhaps county dollars as well.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Yes, I do know that the city of Columbus and Franklin County have been working to use CARES Act dollars for emergency eviction prevention programs. I don't know the current status of those programs and how long those dollars lasted. I know that when CARES Act dollars were initially released back in April, some of the bigger cities launched these programs. And for instance, there was a big city down in Texas that launched the program. They made dollars available in the lottery because they knew that they didn't have enough to serve everybody who needed it. And the funds were gone in 24 hours. So it just gives you a sense of how many people are in need out there. But I know also the state of Ohio has just launched its grant program. So Ohio does continue to make money available to try to provide ongoing emergency assistance.
I encourage everyone to read Evicted. I read it 2 years ago, and you see where it's landed me. Mm-hmm. It's not a book that is difficult to read, but it is it's heart-changing and heartbreaking. to know that our brothers and sisters out there are so harmed by eviction, because it just decimates families and the children. And so it just repeats the pain and ruins lives.
Okay, thank you. I have one question, and then we need to move on. Stephanie, I think Presbyterian women are very good at doing advocacy work if we know what we can advocate for. For example, you may know that at Covenant for Human Trafficking, there were several bills in the Ohio legislature that we were able to promote and to help get passed. So I'm wondering, since you're really tuned into the policy, if you know of bills that we could be advocating for, would you let us know?
Yes.
We can through our Presbyterian Women's Network, we can get the word out to the Ohio, to our Ohio area. So that would be great if you could just let us know.
Yeah, I will definitely do that. And then I can tell you that in terms of source of income discrimination, which is one of the policies that I mentioned, there is a growing movement right here in Central Ohio to pass ordinances on the local level to ban source of income discrimination. So the first community that passed one was Bexley a few months ago. And there are bills up in Reynoldsburg and Worthington and the city of Columbus right now. Upper Arlington, I've already been advocating here very quietly on the local level, but in Upper Arlington, the city council has expressed willingness to take up the ordinance after we get our community center passed. They don't want to talk about it before then because that's such a big lift, but so that's something to kind of pay attention to in your own communities and see whether or not those ordinances are being considered by your city council. And if so, you know, I really recommend supporting ending source of income discrimination.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I know we can clap for you if we put our little reaction.
Oh, thank you.
We are continuing our program on, I would say, economic justice. And I would like to introduce Amanda Woods. She is joining us for a talk on financial literacy. Amanda recently worked for OSU, the Ohio Cooperative Extension Office, specifically with 4-H. And she ran a program teaching youth about financial literacy. Specifically, it was a program associated with 4-H. And why these are important skills. These skills protect everyone. Having financial literacy protects everyone against predatory lending, scams that you hear on the, you know, calling your phone all the time or coming across your emails. And also protect against high interest loans. Again, we are asking people to put their questions for Amanda in the chat box. And if we can't answer them after her speaking engagement, we will present those to Amanda and get you the answers afterwards. So thank you, Amanda, for joining us.
Thanks, Beth. So I have a presentation. This is probably my 5th presentation of the week, so bear with me. So like Beth said, I just left yesterday my work with Ohio State University. I actually worked for Family and Consumer Sciences, and we did a lot of financial literacy education across the state. we focused on financial literacy and financial education across the lifespan. But one of the programs I managed was Real Money, Real World, which was in partnership with 4-H. And it's a youth financial literacy program. We actually had several programs that were based on financial literacy when it comes to youth. My new role is with the Consumer Federation of America, which is financial advocacy, consumer advocacy, and financial literacy. I'm a part of America Saves Now, which is a social marketing campaign that's focused on empowering people to increase their financial literacy and their financial security by focusing on saving strategies. So that is my new work. I will provide my Consumer Federation email in the chat. If you have questions after my presentation, feel free to reach out to me at that address. So today's presentation, we're going to focus on the importance of youth financial literacy. And as Beth said, financial literacy across the lifespan is hugely important because when we're financially literate, we're empowered to make the best decisions for ourselves now and into the future. The importance of youth being financially literate is that they will then be empowered and able to make the right decisions as they age. And when we don't engage with children on the topic of money or finances, a lot of times they will, well, as we'll see in the presentation, they'll form their own opinion, whether it's intentional on our part or not. By empowering them with the gift of financial literacy, you're setting them up for success as they age. So we are going to move forward. So one of the things that we know about youth is that they start to pick up their opinion of money from a very young age. It's suggested that by the age of 7, youth have their own opinion of money, their own behaviors of money, and they're getting that from us, right? They're getting that from the behavior that we model. So even if you're not engaging with your child on the topic of money, on things like how you're spending and why you're spending, they're still getting that information. They're just getting it from your behavior. And so that's why it's so important, as we'll talk about here, that we're intentional when it comes to our finances and engage with our kids and really everyone in the family in that process. So like it says here, because of this, financial literacy really has to be a family practice. Everyone needs to be involved. And when I say everyone needs to be involved, it's important to consider age-appropriate involvement. If you're maybe somebody who's struggling to make ends meet or, pay, especially in the last year, there are a lot of us, dealing with financial stress. I'm not saying to burden your children with this financial stress. I'm saying to engage with them in meaningful ways that will help them get the right resources and tools that they need as they age to take the right approach to their own finances. So engaging in an age-appropriate way, which we'll talk about further on in the presentation. And basically how we're going to use our time today is I'm going to talk a little bit about the why, because I think that's really important for us to think about. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about approaches that we can take with us after today, be it in a school, be it in a church setting, even just your own personal engagement. It really doesn't matter where it happens. The point is it just has to happen. So I know a lot of times we are told there are certain things we don't talk about, and money is one of them. And I feel like this is a stigma that we have to break. Money is important to talk about with our family. It's important for us to engage on this topic. It doesn't have to be taboo. If we learn how to communicate about that topic, it's going to benefit everyone. So when we think about what it means to raise financially literate children or engage in a financially literate forward way with the youth around us, we have to think about, you can see the questions on the right side of your screen. Are we teaching our children about money? And are we modeling good financial behaviors? So there's kind of two sides to this, right? Are we talking to them about it? Are we actively engaging in the process of teaching our kids about what money is and where money comes from and what are the best approaches to take when dealing with our own finances? Also, are we modeling good behaviors? So like I said before, your children, the children around us are going to learn about money. If you're not talking to them about it, they'll still learn about money. Instead, they're going to learn from watching how we interact with our financial lives, how we spend money, how we save money. If you're somebody who's really frugal and you cut coupons and you do all of these things, that behavior will model, it will imprint on your children. They'll see why. Well, they'll see that you're doing it, but that's where the "are we teaching our kids" comes into play, because we want them to see when we're modeling good behavior, but we want to explain to them why we're doing it, why we're making the choices that we can, again, in an age appropriate way. So I know that my nephew and lots of kids, I mean, this is probably all of us, we go to the store, we want something, right? He always wants something. He wants the newest toy. He wants something just shiny and like, he just wants it. He wants it. And it's really important for us to take that as a learning opportunity, really lots of learning opportunities. This is just kind of an easy one to kind of point to. There are lots of approaches that we can take when a child wants something. We can talk to them about where the money that you're spending on the toy or whatever it is came from. We can talk to them about the value of waiting and saving for the thing that we want. We can talk about the value of, or, you know, depending on the age, that concept of wants versus needs. Like, there are so many opportunities. So we shouldn't shy away from this topic. We really should just make it a part of our communication and our relationship with them. So understanding that this is an important topic for us to approach with our children, not even our children, just the children around us. So if the children that are involved in the church, there is nothing saying that we can't bring these topics into our daily interaction with them as well. And you'll see one of the resources that I suggest involves reading. So, I mean, we do that all the time with the children around us. So it doesn't have to be a separate thing. And I think that's the kind of beauty of financial literacy, is it, I think, can be a part of everything that we do, bringing that concept of why and how we're spending really into everything, to just normalize it and make it a part of their behavior as they move forward. So where do we start? I think one of the first things we can do, like I've said, is to engage with the youth around us. And I'm going to present to you a couple of different options and opportunities to do that, different resources that are available to you. And so you can recommend them to the people that you're involved with. You can recommend them to local schools if you have those relationships. But really what we want to do is advocate for ourselves and our financial literacy. And we want to advocate for our youth as well, to make sure that they're having access to this kind of content and this information throughout their lifespan. Because what we don't want them to have, what we don't want to happen to them is, I know for me, I came from a family who we didn't talk about money. I did see how my money was spent in my family. So I learned my behavior for money from my mother, which, you know, probably wasn't great. I got to college. I didn't really understand the burden of credit, as many college students don't. And we are told to get a credit card to get a free this or that. And you're not thinking about it. You just sign up, and then it happens to me. It happens to so many others. And we just didn't have the right tools. We didn't have the right information to advocate for ourselves, to say, this is a bad decision for me. This is not something that I need to happen. And we don't want that to happen to the youth in our lives now. So we want to empower them. We want to educate them. We want to make sure that by the time they get there, when they're at college and they're standing out on the oval and somebody says, hey, sign up for this credit card and I'll give you a free like t-shirt or whatever, they'll be like, that's a bad idea. I don't need this credit card. We want to empower them to advocate for themselves throughout their lives. And education in the form of financial literacy will do that for them. It's so important. So again, some of the resources that I'm going to mention come from the CFPB, which you see here. That's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It's very hard to say. I very rarely get it right. But this is, and I'll put it in the chat when I'm done. Their resources also span the lifespan. So if you're somebody who wants to learn about different topics, this is an organization that I would recommend that you go search their website. They're really easy resources and tools to kind of for all of us to understand on a variety of topics. So they're my go-to when I'm looking for education and information to pass along. The CFPB is a great resource. So I'm going to talk about them a lot in this presentation. I just wanted to give you a little backup as to why I'm mentioning them. So as we discussed earlier, we're teaching kids constantly about money, even when we're not intending to. So we need to make it an intentional practice. They see what we do and they see our approach to money. And so we need to kind of put the why behind it, give them a reason. And we can do that by talking about money. So why we're spending what we're spending, why we're saving what we're saving. With younger kids, it can just be, what is money? Where does it come from? What's a job? These are all things that are really going to help kind of set the foundation for financial literacy. And, you know, kids, young kids, 3, 4, they're not going to grasp the broader concepts when it comes to finances, and that's okay. No one expects them to. But if you start to kind of set that foundation, you can build on that as they age in any environment. So talking about what's a job that you want to do when you get older, or talking about people in your life. That's a mailman. Do you understand that that's a job? That mailman makes his living. That's how he can afford to do the things he wants to do. Engage in them in those very simple ways, and you'll start to set a really sturdy foundation for them to understand how finances are involved in our lives. So include them in the process. Regardless of age, having those family conversations. If you're taking a trip or planning for a purchase, have your kids be a part of the conversation in a meaningful way so that they understand that when we do things, a lot of times we need to save for them. We need to prepare for them. Or if you're making decisions not to go on a trip or not to make a purchase, you know, find age appropriate ways to really engage them in all of those conversations. Reading to kids, something that we do anyways, right? We love to read to kids. It's so much fun. They get so excited. They really love it. But there are resources that will kind of tie this into the topic of financial literacy. So why not? And as you can see here, I have a screenshot of the Money as You Grow resource from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. This is such a great resource to use. I'm going to drop the link to this in your chat as well. But across the youth lifespan, there are tips for anyone to use. So they can be used by educators, they can be used by parents, they can be used by caregivers. And so what this says to us are these resources can be used regardless of where you are and what children you're engaging with. You can bring this topic of financial literacy into that experience for them. There's also a Money as You Grow bookshelf. And so there are a list of books you can read with the kids in your life and how to engage with them on various concepts of money. And so those books, again, you know, span their age growth through childhood and older. So you can engage with them by reading, but also kind of highlight those topics of what money is, why we do this, how we spend, how we save, all of those topics. And the toolkit that's available will cover all of those conversations. There's parent and caregiver guides so you don't have to panic. No one expects us to have all of the answers ever, but those guides will kind of help guide you through those conversations as you're reading so that maybe we'll all get something out of the experience. We can all learn from those conversations that we have with them. So resources like that are available to kind of bring it into a less formal, and I mean, we're reading with them anyway, so why not tie this important lesson into it as well. We can also take and ensure that we're advocating for our children to get financial literacy in schools. And there's a lot happening around this space too. But one of the programs that I managed in my role at Ohio State is such a valuable program when it comes to financial literacy. And I want to talk to you a little bit about why that is. Real Money, Real World was just in schools. Now there's a virtual program available as well, so it can be used outside of schools. So we'll talk a little bit about access to that after. But it is mainly used, you can see here, we usually use it with middle school students, but I think that there's value in doing it in middle school and then again in high school. Having those two different occasions for that information to really be kind of driven home. And the beauty of this program is that they get lessons in the in-person program at school, you know, in the classroom lessons, in the virtual program, it's in videos that we created. But the real value of this program is there's a simulation that they go through. So the students get a career. They have a family size. So some of them have, you know, 1 kids. I think they can go up to like 3 or 4 children. And they sometimes choose a job. Sometimes the job is given to them, but they'll approach this spending simulation with their income, their spouse's a student, so very small income from the spouse. And they have to then go around and make these choices. So a lot of times they don't do what's right out of the gate, but it's a learning experience. So one of the first decisions that a lot of the students will make is to buy a dog, which sounds silly, but they do. They go right for the entertainment booth and they buy a dog. How many dogs do you think are returned by the end of the simulation? Because they can't pay rent or they can't afford food. And we laugh about it because it's so fun that, I mean, I get it. I want all the dogs in the world too. So I understand this desire. Or multiple cars, which always makes me laugh. Multiple cars. They can buy the designer clothes. They can buy all of the stuff. And they'll do this until they realize that their income has to also allow for it. And so it creates space for really meaningful conversations about why it is we make the choices that we make and what will enable us to make those choices. So there's a lot of space for good conversation. There's a lot of room for growth in these conversations. And a lot of times they leave. I actually met with the State Treasurer of Ohio, Robert Sprague, a couple weeks ago about this program. And he told me that his son went through the Real Money, Real World program. And so naturally I asked, what was the takeaway? What was his takeaway? Usually it's that kids are really expensive. That's probably the biggest piece of information that the students tell us that they learned. Wow, children cost a lot. But he said that he wanted to get a dog and then he had to return it. And I was like, oh, heartbreaking, but it's true. But the reason that he thought that was funny, but the reason that he really respects this program is that it created space for them to then have a conversation about it after the fact. I had this experience, this is what I learned. And they were able to engage with, you know, about it after the fact. And it created this lived experience for this child to then kind of take into how can I be critical and how can I be thoughtful about how I approach this topic, topics like this moving forward. So the simulation really gives that real life sort of application to this information. If you're not in a space where your student will have access to this specific program, that's okay. It also just kind of highlights the need to really put these sort of conversations at the forefront, because that's not something our kids will really understand if we don't have this, if they don't have the opportunity to engage in this way. So in the simulation, they're making these decisions on their own. If this isn't an opportunity that's available, then make it an opportunity that's available for your child. Create these spaces where you can have these conversations with them. So this, again, if this is a program that you're interested in, the virtual program, one of the things that I like about it is that it's available and it's a little bit more accessible. So when we created it, I envisioned it working well in community centers, in church youth programs, really any sort of space where we can engage with kids in this way on this topic. So if it's something that you guys have an interest in, just reach out to your local extension office, or you can contact me and I can provide the right resource for you there, just to help kind of put this in front of the youth in your life in whatever way you're engaging with them. But like I said, there's other resources available as well. So what I can recommend to you to do is to find an opportunity that you can engage with youth on this topic and then find the right way to do that. Real Money, Real World isn't going to work for everybody. It's not the right approach. But if you're somebody who has if you have an experience with youth, maybe on Sundays or in some other way, or you know people in your life who teach or who have a lot of kids, whatever it is, just suggest that they find the right resource and tool for them to thoughtfully engage with the kids in their life about financial literacy, because really what we're doing is preparing them to be financially literate adults. setting themselves up to make the best, most sound financial decisions for their life, so that they're not having to spend their 20s digging out of a credit card debt that became a burden because they just didn't understand the weight of those decisions. And so we want to make sure that we're setting everyone up around us to succeed. So if you're somebody who knows adults that need this sort of education, it's out there too. Consumer Finance Protection Bureau has adult resources. It's never too late to make the right decisions and learn to advocate for yourself and for those around you. Because when we think about preparing for the future, we really have to kind of take care of the now first. So I think that my last sort of pitch will be to constantly pursue financially literate practices. Never stop reading, never stop trying to learn more about you and your financial situation as it relates to the life that you live and the life that you want to live moving forward. It is always worth advocating for yourself. It's always worth taking the steps that you think that you need to take to build a healthier financial life for yourself, because our finances impact everything. They'll impact the way that we feel, the way that we approach the world. A lot of times when we're financially strained, we're also dealing with a lot of stress, and living in that state is not sustainable. So these are steps that you can take to really try to improve your life, your children's lives, and the lives of people around you. These are simple steps that we can take. So I'll stop there because I can talk a lot about this topic. But if you want more resources from me, I will put these websites in the chat for you. I can provide this PowerPoint. I don't know if it's valuable to you, but if you want to reach out to me on specific topics, I'm happy to kind of point you in the right direction for resources or guidance as far as how to approach that. I will end my slide.
Thank you, Amanda. Are there any questions? That you would like to pose for Amanda? Oh, go ahead, Lynn.
I'd just like to say thank you. I wish I'd realized what we were doing as we were raising our kids. I will share this information with my children. But they live, two of them live in different states. How do we, so in that case, I'd have to send them to the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau.
Yeah, so there are resources available. There are a ton. So we have a lot here in Ohio. We do, yes. I know this program, the Real Money Real World program specifically, is also available out of state. So I'll put the link to that program. So here I'm going to type in, this is the Money As You Grow toolkit. It doesn't, I don't want it to make it seem like I'm only advocating for the Real Money Real World program. It doesn't matter how they're getting it. It's just important that they are getting it. So these resources are great. You could check with your own, you could recommend that they check with their own local extension office to see if they have resources and education that's available for youth financial literacy. But there's a ton of information out there. There's an FDIC program called Money Smart for Young Adults. I can put that in the chat as well. There are a lot of resources available, and they're all going to be great. I think that the biggest takeaway is just to start having these conversations, start talking about those topics of money, and it'll kind of grow from there.
I had no idea how much we modeled, but when I think back to my childhood, my mother clipped coupons assiduously. She dragged us from store to store to store to find the best buy, and then back to the store that did have the best buy when she was shopping for our clothes. It was painful for me. I mean, it exhausted me. I understood the underlying premise, but it was, they'd grown up during the Depression. It was really, really hard for me as a child. But I did understand it. And I guess as a result, I was really very frugal. But then we have sort of two separate families, because we have a son and daughter who are in their 40s, and then we have one who's in the end stage of her 20s. And the way we treated the third child was so different because we had more money by the time she came along. It just, so, wow, the legacy we give our kids. Thank you, Amanda, for that education.
Yeah. That's honestly what you just said too, even how different it can be from one child to the next, is my lived experience. My parents had a lot less money and resources when they raised my sister, who's 8 years older. So her approach to finances as she was growing up was drastically different from my own, because when I was being raised, my parents had a lot more resources available. So my approach to money was a lot less critical, a lot less serious. I wasn't thinking about how I spend it. I watched my mom, if something broke, they would just throw it out and get a new one. It's fine, just replace it. And without the thought of like, who's paying for those things. And so that was a lot of work that I had to put in my 20s to undo a lot of my approaches to things that, you know, I'm not blaming them, but it's hard when we don't think about how we're teaching our kids, I mean, really how to approach everything. We model behavior for them when it comes to everything, not just finances. So if we know that and we can think about that, then we can just be a lot more thoughtful about how we approach that.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks, Len.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. I am going to hand this off to Charles Lee to close us out.